Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Club Chaverut's Sunday night musical interlude. Tonight's guest artist, Mr. Jonno Lightstone, who most of you have been entertained at Beth David and on Zoom in the past. Our program tonight is generously sponsored by Four Elms Retirement Residence. Sarah Vero, Community Relations Manager at Four Elms, has joined us this evening and would like to say a few words. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Cliff. Nice to see everybody virtually this evening. And thank you so much for inviting me this evening. Just to say a couple of quick words. I'll keep it brief. Don't want to keep anybody from the entertainment. Just wanted to say that we're so happy to have such a great partnership with the club, and we love working with you. You know, programs like this, especially during these times, have been so wonderful to keep people connected. And something like music is just something that can always bring, you know, folks together, no matter who you are. So thank you for having me. And on behalf of Four Elms, we hope it is a wonderful presentation this evening. So we are located right at the corner of Dufferin and Steeles. For those of you who aren't familiar with our location, I know that we've been to several events and have sponsored events in the past, so you may be already familiar with us, or perhaps have attended our events as well. So we offer both independent and assisted retirement living. And we would welcome anybody if they have any questions about that, or how we can sort of help to guide them through any change, or for yourself, a friend, or a family member. We're always open to be in touch. And wish everyone a wonderful Sunday evening. And I'll let Jonno take it away. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay. Jonno, if you'd like to start your program.
Do you want me to I'll give a little brief introduction about
Please.
The program and how it came about. I was approached by Lisa Roy at the Miles Nadal JCC last year to put together a program on Yiddish music. And so what I've done is I actually have 3 programs. This one that we're going to look at tonight is the third in the series of 3. The entire series is called Songs from the Heart, the Story of Yiddish Music. And the first segment focuses on very early, like late 19th century, Abraham Goldfaden and the Yiddish theater. And then the second segment focuses on quite a few of the great singers of the Yiddish theater. And tonight's segment I brought forward to really the last half of the 20th century, when Yiddish music had kind of died off for a while during the 50s and 60s, and then in the late 70s and the early 80s with the klezmer revival, there was a huge revival of interest amongst musicians, Jewish musicians and singers in Yiddish music, and also an audience that was ready to hear it again. So a lot of what we're going to hear and watch is recent segments of films, live performance from singers and musicians from all over the world. So here's the third part. I'll just get this set up, and it's about an hour and 10 minutes. So here we go. Hi, I'm Jonno Lightstone, and this is the story of Yiddish music, Songs from the Heart, Part 3. We're now going to turn our attention to Yiddish music after the Second World War. In the post-war era, Yiddish was no longer the lingua franca of the Jewish people, and there were many reasons for this. First and foremost was the Holocaust in Europe. Not only had millions of Jewish lives been lost, but a culture had been virtually wiped out. Even if performers and musicians for Yiddish theater could be found and a show could be produced, the mass audience for it no longer existed. In North America, where Jewish art and culture was thriving, Yiddish was no longer central to Jewish life. Children of Jewish immigrants who had come to America wanted to integrate into mainstream American society. Yiddish was seen as a relic of the old country and had little value in the modern world. After the war, for some, Yiddish was regarded as the language of the ghetto. It belonged to the past and better for it to be left behind. The future for American Jewry lay in the state of Israel. Hebrew, rather than Yiddish, became the language that defined Jewishness, and Israeli folk songs and folk dancing became popular. While this may be an oversimplification, it does explain why during the 50s and 60s, popular interest in Yiddish music declined, and the music itself went through a phase of being almost dormant. From here, I want to look at two very different threads of Yiddish music that ran concurrently through this period. The first is Yiddish folk music, and the second is Yiddish music as spoof or parody. I want to draw a characterization of each of these musical threads. Yiddish folk music is earnest and serious. It draws on traditions of American folk music. Think Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan. It is on the surface musically unsophisticated. Often the only accompaniment to the voice is an acoustic guitar. Politically, it is left-leaning, drawing on leftist and internationalist Jewish political traditions from the labor movement and from the fight for equality. And finally, it is scholarly. Research into songs and source material is an important aspect of choosing repertoire for performance. Now, on the Yiddish music as parody side, we have music that is funny because it is a spoof or parody of something else. It is irreverent, it is ironic, and it does not take itself seriously. This is musically sophisticated, drawing on mainstream popular American music. And if there is a Jewish tradition that might serve as a precedent, it would have to be the institution of the badchin, or the wedding jester. The wedding jester was the master of ceremonies at traditional Jewish weddings in Eastern Europe. And although this custom had died out in America, it was still remembered by some people. And the badchin would improvise songs and invent rhyming couplets to both celebrate and mock the bride and groom and their honored guests. Representing each of these different threads are two very different characters. For Yiddish folk music, there is folk singer and Yiddish scholar Ruth Rubin, and on the parody side of Yiddish music is comedian and clarinetist Mickey Katz. I'm going to begin on the folk side with Ruth Rubin. Ruth Rubin was a Canadian-American singer, poet, folklorist, and scholar of Yiddish culture and music. Born in Montreal in 1906, she grew up speaking Yiddish, English, and French. In 1935, she decided to become a Yiddish folklorist and began doing research at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research in New York. In 1947, she started doing serious field work in the immigrant Jewish communities of New York, Montreal, and Toronto, interviewing displaced people who had arrived following the Holocaust. She collected thousands of folk songs and folk stories and is considered one of the leading Yiddish collector scholars of the 20th century. Part of her importance lies in her influence on the generation of Yiddish singers of the klezmer revival who followed in her footsteps, collecting Yiddish songs. We will now listen to Ruth Rubin singing Bin ich mir a Schneiderl, If I Was a Tailor. This was recorded in 1978. A few things to note about this recording. Although Rubin's Yiddish is beautiful, her performance sounds folky in style. That is to say, her voice is untrained. She sings with none of the Yiddish inflections that we heard some of the cantors singing in previously. And the only backup instrument on this recording is banjo, an American folk instrument that has little connection with traditional Yiddish music. The connection to American folk music was strong at this time. Yiddish and klezmer musical traditions were not part of the repertoire of folk artists. So let's listen to Ruth Rubin and Bin ich mir a Schneiderl.
Bin ich mir a Schneiderl, bin ich mir a Schneiderl, leb ich mir Tag aus Tag ein, freilich und lustig und fein. Sog mir, Schneider, Liebinker und Guter, sie gibt dir die Nadel, genug eu Bräut mit Butter. Ich verdien a Gilden mit a Dreier, ess ich Bräut bloß, weil Butter ist zu teuer. Bin ich mir a Schusterl, bin ich mir a Schusterl, leb ich mir Tag aus Tag ein, freilich und lustig und fein. Sog mir, Schuster, sie hast du was zu kaien, und als dir fällt, sie hast du wo zu leihen. Keiner leiht nicht, keiner gibt kein Norwes, ich bin a Schuster, geh ich Tag Borwes. Bin ich mir a Blecherl, bin ich mir a Blecherl, leb ich mir Tag aus Tag ein, freilich und lustig und fein. Sog mir, Blecher, wie groß ist bei dir die Neut? Hast du ein Buches, hast du genug ein Bräut? Ich sitz und klapp bei jenem die Dächer, bei mir in Stuhl, rinnt von alle Lächer. Bin ich mir a Kremmerl, bin ich mir a Kremmerl, leb ich mir Tag aus Tag ein, freilich und lustig und fein. Sog mir, Kremer, hast du mit was zu handeln? Hast du in Kreml Roschenkes mit Mandeln? Ich hab in Kreml für 2 Groschen Säure, ich schlepp dem Dalles und ich bench dem Bäuere. Tididam, tidididam, tididam, tidididam.
I now want to turn to the comic side of Yiddish music, and that's with the great comedian Mickey Katz. Mickey Katz was a musician and comedian who took Yiddish music into the realm of parody. He was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1909 and took up the clarinet and saxophone at a young age. After completing high school, he played with various jazz bands in and around Cleveland, then got a job with Howard Phillips Orchestra in New York. In 1942, he was hired as band leader at the Alpine Village Theater Restaurant in Cleveland. And in 1945, took his 6-man band, Mickey Katz and his Crazy Kittens, on a U.S. tour of Europe with Betty Hutton. That's crazy with a K. You can kind of tell the direction his music was about to take just by the name of his band. The turning point came for Katz when he played with Spike Jones in Hollywood. Spike Jones was known for his parodies of popular American songs with added sound effects, such as bird calls, dog barks, whistles, gunshots, and the like. After a year-long stint with Jones, Katz left and decided to make an English-Yiddish comedy record. This was a 78 recording. On the A side was Heim Offen the Range, a takeoff on Home on the Range, and on the B side was the Yiddish Square Dance. With the backing of RCA, he sold 35,000 copies in a few weeks, and in those days, that was a hit. Many more records were to follow, all of them takeoffs on American popular music. For instance, David Crockett, a takeoff on Davy Crockett, Knock Around the Clock, Rock Around the Clock, Borscht Riders in the Sky, take off on ghost riders in the sky. 16 tons of latkes, from the old country song, 16 tons. How much is that pickle in the window? How much is that doggy in the window? There were numerous others. The secret to Katz's success was to take a well-known American song and do a very clever Yiddish-English spoof on it. On top of that, he hired some of the best talent in the business. Top-line jazz musicians such as trumpeter Manny Klein and then later Ziggy Elman, also on trumpet, Cy Zentner on trombone, Sammy Wise on drums, and Benny Gill on violin. Ziggy Elman knew klezmer music very well and was able to spice up the songs and give them a Jewish flavor. Katz continued to create parodies until 1957 and then continued performing them till his death in 1985. And his legacy is still being debated. As a satirist and comedian, he is one of the best. He was to have an influence on a number of singers and entertainers. Alan Sherman in the 60s with My Son the Folk Singer, Weird Al Yankovic with his parodies of American pop and rock music, and later on klezmer clarinetist Don Byron recorded a Mickey Katz tribute record in 1993. There were, however, many people who did not like his music. They found it offensive and felt he was making fun of Yiddish and Jewish traditions. As well, although the music itself is technically virtuosic, there were shortcomings that would be noticed later on, when klezmer music began to be taken seriously during the klezmer revival of the 80s. A recording of instrumental klezmer tunes by Katz and company, to my ears anyway, sounds like a pastiche of the real thing and is not really rooted in traditional klezmer music. Anyway, let's now listen to Mickey Katz and his orchestra playing 16 Tons of Latkes. This song, recorded in 1958, was a takeoff on the hit song 16 Tons by country music star Merle Travis. Let's have a listen.
Oh, I went to work in a Delikatessen, für 30 $ und plenty zu fressen. Die Ballebus promised me a real gedille. Instead of gedille, I catched me a killer. You load 16 tons of hard salami. Con beef, roll beef und hot pastrami. I hack around everything, get zu essen. I owe meine Schuhe to the Delikatessen. I was born one morning and I gave a geschrei. My Mishpuche was happy, it was a holiday. I wanted my bottle, I felt real chipper. I didn't get nothing cause it was Yom Kippur. 16 tons, all kinds smoked fishes, Latkes, Blitzes und heiße Knisches. Oh Lord, ich nehme schnell zu der Promised Land. A Feuer auf dem Boss soll werden verbrennt. Tate und Mama, they wanted a baby, a girl for sure or a boy chick maybe. When Papi saw me, he said, "Noise, what's this?" She said, "Call them oil, there's gonna be a bris. You load 16 tons of bob and pitcha, kishki, pap and haleva. To eat a piece kishki, you must have koyach. Just like a stain, it lays in your boyach." Ich hab it schwer, just like a Jürg, who gets a vacation, a nächtiger Tag. A finsterer Leben, I'm telling you boys, comes Pesach time, there's no bread in the hoys. You load 16 tons of leckerchen Tegel, Hering, Miss Lily, stuffed Hänsel and Bagel. Genick zu schleppen, just like a Pferd. Sagt zu mir, Menschen ist Tegenbrett.
I now want to backtrack a little bit to talk about some of the poets and songwriters during the interwar period. This is between World War I and World War II, before we get into the modern era. The first is Mordechai Gebertig. Born in 1877, Mordechai Gebertig was a Yiddish poet and songwriter who became a dominant voice in the cultural life of his native city, Krakow, during the early years of the 20th century. He was a member of the Jewish Labor Bund, and many of his songs reflect the left-wing politics of this Yiddish proletarian socialist organization. During the interwar period, his songs were known and sung throughout the entire Yiddish cultural world, including in the New York Yiddish Theater. Unschooled in music, he would tap out a melody with one finger on the piano or play it on the shepherd's pipe, then would sing the melody to Julius Hoffman, who was a composer and conductor in Krakow, and who would transcribe the music into musical notation. Gebertig was killed by the Nazis during the Krakow ghetto uprising of 1942. His most famous song, Es brennt, unser Städtel brennt, Our Town is Burning, was written following a pogrom in the Polish town of Preštic in 1938. The song has since then come to be associated with the Holocaust. He is now regarded as one of the most important composers of folk-style Yiddish songs of all time. So now let's have a listen to another of Gebertig's songs. This one is called Arbeitslose March, the March of the Jobless Corps. Gebertig wrote this song in the interwar period, a period of social upheaval when thousands of people were out of work. The lyrics say, 1, 2, 3, 4, join the marching jobless corps. No work in the factories, no more manufacturing, all the tools are broken and rusted, every wheel and window busted. Through the city streets we go. Sounds a little like today, doesn't it? This was recorded by the German group Geigen Hansel on their 1979 release Jiddische Lieder, and this reflects the far reach of Gebertig's songs. So let's have a listen to Arbeitslose Marsch.
Zwei, drei, vier Arbeitslose sehnen mir, nicht gehört Kadosch im Land, in Fabrik dem Hammerklangs, liegen Kehl im Kalt vergessen, s nehmt der Schaver sich schein fressen, gehen mir rum in Gas, wie die Queer im Pust und Pass, wie die Queer im Pust und Pass. 1, 2, 3, 4 Arbeitslose sehnen mir, ohne Baguette, ohne Heim, unser Bett ist Erdenleim, hat noch wer was zu genießen, teilt man sich mit jedem Biesen, Wasser will ich mir im Wein, gießen mir in sich herein, gießen mir in sich herein. 1, 2, 3, 4 Arbeitslose sehnen mir, jahrelang die Arbeit schwer ungeschafft, als mehr und mehr heißer Schlösser, Städten, Länder, Fahrer, Heifele, Verschwender, unser Leute, Fahr ist was, Hungerneut und arbeitlos, Hungerneut und arbeitlos. 1, 2, 3, Konfrontiert sei marschieren wir, Arbeitslose Schritt nach Schritt, und wir singen sich ein Lied von Land der Welt nahe, wo es leben menschenfreie, arbeitslos ist kein Schumand, in dem nahen freien Land, in dem nahen freien Land.
I'm now going to talk about another poet who has become very important for the Yiddish repertoire, and this is Hirsch Glick. Hirsch Glick was born in Vilna in 1922. He began to write poetry in his early teens and co-founded with several other young Jewish poets a literary circle called Jungwald, Young Forest. While in the Vilna ghetto during the German occupation of Lithuania, he wrote many songs, including Zog nit keinmol, Never Say. The song was adopted as the Partisans' official anthem and has since come to be known as the Partisan Song. He also wrote Still die Nacht is ausgesternt, The Quiet Night is Full of Stars. Glick survived the liquidation of the ghetto and was sent to a concentration camp in Estonia in 1944, shortly before the camp was to be liquidated by the Nazis. He and 40 other prisoners managed to escape into the surrounding forest. There, they joined up with a group of partisans, and this is where he and his comrades were all killed in combat with the Nazi forces. So let's now have a listen to Still die Nacht is ausgesternt, The Quiet Night Full of Stars. The title and melody are truly deceptive. This is seemingly a romantic ballad about a snowy night sky full of stars, but the lyrics, in fact, celebrate the Jewish partisans' armed resistance to the Nazis. This film clip was recorded live at a sound studio in Berlin in 2018. The performers are Daniel Kahn, Sasha Lurie, and Craig Udelman. Just to tell you what instruments they're playing, Kahn is on guitar and harmonica, Lurie is singing, and Udelman plays violin. These are all part of the younger generation of Yiddish performers. They sing in both English and in Yiddish. And this performance is in a very folky style with a harmonica playing reminiscent of Bob Dylan. Also a very rootsy klezmer violin solo. So let's have a listen.
Silent stars are shining o'er you. In the frost your hands are numb. Remember, sweet comrade, how I showed you how a soldier holds her gun. A girl, a coat of fur and leather, holding a pistol in her hand, waiting and watching for the German convoy to come around the bend. Still, die Nacht ist ausgesternt und der Frost hat stark gebrennt. Sie gedenkst du, wie ich hab dich gelernt, halten a Speier in die Hand. Amoi, da Pelzel und a Beret und hon halt in hand fest an agan. Amoid mit asamet enem bonim, hit op dem soines caravan. She aims her trusty little weapon, breathes and pulls the trigger back. A transport full of ammunition. One shot stops it in its tracks.
Gezielt, geschossen und getroffen.
Oh, der Kleininker ist doil. An oito auf Funken mit Waffen. Verhalten hat sie mit ein Keul. Dawn, she crawls out of the forest with garlands of snow all in her hair. One more little victory for freedom, one more comrade brave and fair.
Verpackt von Wandern ausgetroffen, mit Schneegirlanden auf die Haut. Gemutigt von Klinken gezogen, war unser neuen freien Dorf. Gemutigt von Klinken gezogen, war unser neuen freien Dorf.
And now let's jump forward in time to look at some of the performers of the modern era. The first singer I want to talk about is Theodore Bikal. Bikal is internationally known as an actor, stage performer, singer, musician, composer, and political activist. What didn't he do? He was born into a Jewish family in Vienna, Austria in 1924, and following the German annexation of Austria in 1938, his family fled to Palestine. He started acting while in his teens and was one of the founding members of Kameri Theater, a leading Israeli theater company. In 1948, Bikal moved to London to study acting at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and then in 1954 moved to the United States. He played on Broadway, acted in movies and television, and made numerous folk music albums, accompanying himself on guitar and singing in over a dozen different languages, including Yiddish. He was one of the co-founders of the Newport Folk Festival in 1959 and an active participant in the folk music revival of the 60s. Towards the end of his life, he performed at international klezmer and Yiddish music festivals, coming full circle to embrace Yiddish heritage along with the community of younger Jewish musicians and performers who were leaders in the revitalization of klezmer and Yiddish music. So let's now listen to Theodore Bikal singing Zog nit Keinmol, Never Say, or the Partisan Song by Hirsch Glick. And the lyrics tell us, never say that you're going your last way, although the skies filled with lead cover blue days, our promised hour will soon come, our marching steps ring out, here we are. Let's have a listen. In this film clip, we'll see Theodore Bikal with masked bands and performers at the grand finale of the Krakow Festival of Jewish Culture in December 2020.
Listen. Listen. Shh. Listen to the stillness. This is the stillness of the voices that were taken away from us. People who lived here and there and 2 streets away, Mordechai Gebertig. Voices that were taken from us. We are the voices that are left. We must be their voice carrying their song. And so we will do the hymn of the survivors, of those who fought and those who survived. Never say that you've walked the final way, though leaden skies obscure the light of day. The hour we longed for will certainly appear, and our steps will proclaim we are still here. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst den letzten Weg. Gott Himmeln bleibe, verstellen neue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte schon. Es wird abbeugt von unser Trott, wir seilen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte schon. Es wird abbeugt von unser Trott, wir seinen da. Vom grünen Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee. Wir kommen heut mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und jeder spritzt, was ist gefallen, unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Glore, unser Mut. Von jedem spritzt, was ist gefallen von unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Glore, unser Mut. Das Lied geschrieben ist nicht Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Liedl von a Vogel oder frei. Das hat a Volk zwischen fallen die gewinnt. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hände. Das hat a Volk zwischen fallen die gewinnt. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hände. Da sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Hat Schimmeln bleiene, verstellen neue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird abbeugt an unser Trott, wir seinen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird abbeugt an unser Trott, wir seinen da.
And now we leap forward to modern times with Yiddish songs and the klezmer revitalization. Once upon a time, people called it klezmer revival, but we now look at it a little differently because klezmer music, although was dormant for a while, didn't really disappear. But it wasn't until the early 1980s that Yiddish music, as well as klezmer music, started to make a real comeback. This was a time when young Jewish musicians, the grandchildren of Jewish immigrants from Europe, started to take a serious interest in klezmer music, which was the music of their grandparents. The 80s saw the emergence of klezmer bands such as the Klezmorim, Andy Statman and Zev Feldman, Capella, the Klezmer Conservatory Band, also known as KCB, the Klezmatics, and the Chicago Klezmer Ensemble. The thread that connected these groups was their interest in traditional klezmer music, which was an instrumental repertoire played at Jewish weddings that included both dance and non-dance or ritual tunes. Although singing was not part of the klezmer tradition, some bands felt that a Yiddish singer had an important role to play on the concert stage, to be the front person who would connect directly with the audience. In the glory days of the Yiddish theater, it was the stories that songs told that the audience connected with, and people were still familiar with these songs Many of the contemporary musicians were now doing research into Yiddish folk repertoire, discovering new songs by interviewing people and recording them singing Yiddish songs that they knew. Between Yiddish theater songs, labor songs, songs written during the interwar period, songs smuggled out of concentration camps, and songs collected by scholars and musicians, such as Ruth Rubin and others, there was a whole body of Yiddish repertoire waiting to be performed. 3 singers that come out of the early klezmer revival should be mentioned now. The first is Michael Alpert. He was initially with the group Capella. He later went on to co-found the klezmer supergroup Brave Old World. And now Adrienne Cooper, who was a driving force behind the revival of Yiddish music, who also sang with Capella, but also sang with many of these other groups. And finally, Lauren Sklamberg, who co-founded the Klezmatics. In 1979, Henry Saposnik founded the band Capella, a group dedicated to playing klezmer and Yiddish music. Let's have a listen to an early recording of Capella with Michael Alpert singing a humorous Yiddish song by Michael Gordon called Die Maschka, in which the virtues of mashka or whiskey are extolled. In the opening stanza, we are told, "Whiskey, I'll hold you in respect. I'll respect you like an elder. I'll hold you in respect, whiskey, because I need your favors." The singer then goes on to tell how whiskey played a role at every important occasion in his life, from birth to bris to wedding, and finally to his death. So here's a live clip filmed in New York City in the early 80s of Capella and Michael Alpert singing Die Maschka.
Bis als der Schadchen ist einmal gekommen zu meinen Seiden. Dem Taten mit der Mame nach Schiedach reden. Und hat mich gerett, nur sie ist. Wie das Gläsle Maschki hat sich hereingemischt. Zu lieben Maschki ist geworden, der Schiddach geschlossen, der Tati ist geworden, der Mama ist chossen. Ay, da, 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 ay, da, 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 ay, da, 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 ay, da, 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 da. Euer Gedenk noch, was sie gewinnt bei meinem Brief. Die Maschke ist nicht gewinnt, Rapp und Tisch. Alle Ohren sind gewünscht, ganz feinem und schönem, gesunden Masel Tov. Als ich soll auswachsen, a geräßer Rob, bis 120 Jahre.
Michael Alpert became a key figure in the revitalization of klezmer and Yiddish music throughout the 80s and 90s. As a Yiddish singer, he brings a natural, folk-like quality to the fore, combining the earthiness of the Badchen, if you remember that's the wedding jester or MC, with the yearning kreksen or sobs of the cantor. Not only is Alpert a Yiddish singer, he's also a multi-instrumentalist, a scholar, and an educator. He has traveled throughout Eastern Europe and the Americas, documenting traditional Jewish musicians and singers. He can largely be credited with reviving the practice of sekund, or second part, fiddling in klezmer music. This is a style of fiddle playing that provides a rhythmic harmonic backup behind the melody. It's a style that had pretty much fallen out of use before the klezmer revival. He is one of the foremost researchers into traditional Yiddish dance, helping to revive Yiddish dance so that it can retake its rightful place alongside klezmer music. As well, he is one of the founding members of the klezmer supergroup Brave Old World. This is a band with deep roots in klezmer traditions, but they have positioned themselves in the contemporary world, rejecting the schmaltzy, imitative approach to playing klezmer music that we so often hear. So let's now listen to Brave Old World with Michael Alpert singing Die Sapochkelach, the Boots. This is a traditional Yiddish song that Alpert learned from Bronya Sakina. In the song, the singer says, "I'd sell my boots to ride in open carriages just to be together with you." It's so romantic. Let's listen to Michael Alpert with Die Sapochkelach.
Fahre kaufen die Sapochkelach in fuhren auf die Draschkelach, abi mit dir Nähe nimmt sie sein. Ich und dir und die und mir, wie a Klamki und a Tier, geht's alle fähig, alle meins. Tararariam, tararariam, tararam, mai dai ram dam. Tararariam, tararariam, tararam, mai dai dam dam. Ay, tararariam, tararam, mai dai ram. Ay, tararariam, tararariam. Oy essen nun a Tischale, in Schlufen nun a Kischale, abi mit dir in Neyenem sie sein. Oy echun dir in die und mir, is wie a Klomki und a Tier, ketz alle fähig, alle mein. Tararariam, tararariam, tararam, mai dairam dam dam. Ay, tarararam, bam 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 bam. Ay, tararariam, tararam, mai dairariam. Ay, tararariam, dairariam. Welt Allah und verdienen fremde Geld Allah, abi mit dir in Neyenem zusammen. Oy echun dir in die mir, wie a Klomki und a Tier, ketz alle fähig, alle meins. Tararariam, tararariam, tararam, ay dam dam dam. Ay, tararariam, tararam, ay dam dam. Ay, tararariam, tarababa ba 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 ba. Ay, tarararaba ba ba ba. Tararariam, tararariam, tararam, ay dam dam. Ay, tarababa ba 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 ba. Ay, tarababa, tarabama ay tararariam. Ay, tararariam, tararariam. Ay, tararariam, tararariam, tararariam.
And now let's move on to Adrienne Cooper. Adrienne Cooper was a Yiddish singer recognized as one of the greatest performers and teachers of Yiddish vocal music of her generation. She played a significant role in the promotion of Yiddish culture as assistant director at the YIVO Institute of Jewish Research, and she also co-founded Klezkamp. She has performed and recorded with Capella, the Klezmatics, Frank London's Klezmer Brass All-Stars, pianist Zalman Mlotek, the Yiddish Three Divas, Marilyn Lerner, and many others. Significant Yiddish recordings include The Partisans of Vilna, Songs from the Vilna Ghetto, Dreaming in Yiddish, and Ghetto Tango with Zalman Mlotek. And I should just add here that Zalman is noted as one of the preeminent pianists and accompanists for vocal singers and an expert on Yiddish theater of all the pianists who play. So we'll next listen to Adrienne Cooper and Zalman Mlotek performing Wollt ich gehabt koyach, If I Had the Strength. This is also known as the peace song because of the repeated refrain, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom. And the melody is a traditional Shabbat melody that you'll probably recognize. So let's have a listen to Wollt ich gehabt koyach.
Wollt ich gehabt koyach, wollt ich gelaufen in die Gassen, wollt ich geschrien, Shalom, bei Shalom, Shalom, Shalom.
Wollt ich gehabt,
wollt ich gehabt,
wollt ich gelaufen in die Gassen,
wollt ich gelaufen in die Gassen,
wollt ich geschrien,
wollt ich geschrien, Shalom, 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 Shalom. Da 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 gelaufen in die Gassen, wollt ich geschrien, Shalom, 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 Shalom. Die Blumen Yassili, ja, wie Bengalan Baulitza, ja, wie Krichalamir, oi mir, Begala Poliza, ja mi kryczał na mir, oj mir, oj
gelaufen in die Gassen, wollt ich geschrien, Shalom,
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 Shalom. Hallelujah.
I now want to turn to another contemporary performer, and that is Lawrence Glamberg. In 1986, Lawrence Glamberg and Frank London founded the Klezmatics, a klezmer band steeped in Eastern European Jewish tradition and spirituality that brings a New York City grittiness to their sound. Starting with a base of Hamisha klezmer, or down-home klezmer, their music incorporates an eclectic mix of Arab, African, Latin, Balkan, and rock influences. Sklamberg, the frontman for the group, said that he was first inspired to sing Yiddish songs when he heard a cassette tape of Michael Alpert performing a song from Kapelia's first album. Music critic Robert Christgau has described Sklamberg's voice as, quote, transcendent, ethereal, and sensual. His crystalline, expressive vocalizing never fails to have an emotional impact on all within its range. And I have to say, it's quite true. His voice is amazing. So let's now listen to the Klezmatics perform Schnirla Perla, Little String, Little Pearl. This is a traditional Yiddish folk song that tells of the coming of the Mashiach ben David, the Messiah, son of David. This beautiful and haunting rendition was performed live in Berlin in 2007. Let's have a listen to Schnirla Perla.
Schnirla Perla gildene von Mashiach ben David sitzt oben an. Halt a Becher in der rechter Hand, macht a Broche auf den ganzen Land. Amen, Amen, das ist wohl. Mashiach wird kommen, ein heintiges Jahr. Amen, Amen, das ist wohl. Mashiach wird kommen, ein heintiges Jahr. Oi, Schnirla Perla gildene von Mashiach ben David sitzt oben an. Halt a Becher in der rechten Hand, macht a Broche auf den ganzen Land. Amen, Amen, das ist wahr. Mashiach wird kommen, heintiges Jahr. Amen, Amen, das ist wahr. Mashiach wird kommen, heintiges Jahr. Hij wird kommen zuvor, hij will sein gute Jahren. Hij wird kommen zu reiten, hij will sein gute Zeiten. Hij wird kommen zu gehen, hij will lieben in Eretz Yisrael. Ein
Now we're going to cross the ocean to look at one of Israel's most important singers, and that's Chava Alberstein. She's one of Israel's most important and respected entertainers. She has recorded over 60 albums. 10 of them happen to be in Yiddish. Born in Poland in 1946, she moved to Israel with her family in 1950. While still a young girl, she began to perform publicly, accompanying herself on guitar. A live radio performance in 1964 launched her career as a folk singer, and she was able to secure a contract with CBS Records shortly afterward. She said she was inspired by Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, and the Weavers back in the 60s to make her mark in Yiddish music. It seems that things come full circle because Pete Seeger performed with Ruth Rubin, so the folk connection runs through contemporary Yiddish music. Alberstein's third album, Hoben mir a Niggendel, I Have a Little Song, highlighted Yiddish repertoire. In 1998, she recorded an album of Yiddish songs with the Klezmatics entitled The Well. This brought her international attention. So next up, let's listen to Chava Alberstein in a live performance recorded in 1989 of Oifenweg steht a Bäum, On the Road Stands a Tree. She accompanies herself on acoustic guitar. The song tells the story of a young boy who says he will become a bird and fly away from home against the wishes of his mother. The song says, On the road stands a tree, it stands bent and deserted. All the birds of that tree have flown away, turned toward the west, turned toward the east, and the rest turned toward the south, and the tree is left alone, abandoned to the storm. Let's have a listen.
Auf dem Weg steht der Bäum, steht eingebeugt. Alle Vögel von dem Bäum sehnen sich zu fliegen. Drei kein Misrach, drei kein Meire, und der Rest kein Durem. Und am Baum gelost allein, Hefker fahren Sturem. Sag ich zu der Mammen Herr, sollst mir nur nicht sterben, weil ich Mama 1 und 2 bald auf Vogel werden. Ich will sitzen auf den Bäumen und will ihm verwiegen über den Winter mit der Trist, mit der schönen Menigen. Ja di da di da di da di da di ja di da di da di ja di da di da di da di da di ja di da di da di ja di da di da. Sagt mein Mama litte Kind und sie weint mit Tränen. Kennst du Lille auf den Bäumen, mir verfreuen wären. Sag ich Mama, es ist ein Schott, deine schöne Augen. Und eider was und eider wenn, bin ich mir a Vogel. Weint die Mama itzig kreun, nimm Gottes Willen, nimm Gott mit a Schalikel, sollst dich nicht verkehren. Die Kaloschen nimm dir mit, es geht a scharfer Winter, und die Kutschme tu dir an, weis mir und wind mir, ja di da di da di da di da di li da di da di ja di da di da di da di da di li da di da di ja di da di da. Und das Winterleibel nimm, du es on, du Scheute, aber du willst nicht sein, kein Gast, zwischen alle Teute. Heb die Fliegel, es ist mir schwer, zu viel Sachen. Hat die Mama ungetan, dem Fegerle, dem Schwachen. Guck ich treurig mir rein, in mein Mames Augen, sagt ihr Liebschaft nicht gelost, wären mich auf Eugen. Auf dem Weg steht ein Bäum, steht eingebeugen. Alle Vögel von den Bäumen sollen sich zerfliegen. Ja, di da di da di, di da di da di, di da di da di, ja di da di da, di da di da di, ja di da di da di, ja di da di da.
So that pretty much brings us now to the present day, except that it would not be possible to showcase all of the Yiddish singers and klezmer bands that perform worldwide. This wonderful music that at one time seemed to be on the brink of disappearance has made an extraordinary comeback and spread all over the world. You will find Yiddish singers on every continent and klezmer bands in the most out-of-the-way places. Who would have thought that that klezmer music would take root in Japan? Well, it has. There was a Japanese klezmer band at Ashkenaz 3 years ago. Major Yiddish music festivals take place in Canada, the United States, and Europe, and it is especially heartening to see the reception that Yiddish music gets in the countries of Eastern Europe. These are the countries where Yiddish music first arose. So I'm going to leave you now with one last film clip. This is from the 2008 Warsaw Festival of Jewish Culture. And we're going to watch a performance by the 3 Yiddish divas. These are Adrienne Cooper, Teresa Tova, and Joanne Bortz. I've already spoken a bit about Adrienne Cooper, so I will tell you a little about the others. Teresa Tova is a Canadian singer and actor, most noted for her play Still the Night, which won several Dora Maver Moore Awards in 1997. And Joanne Bortz is a New York-based Broadway actor and singer who also performs in concerts and music festivals across the US, Canada, and Europe. The song they sing is based on an old Yiddish favorite, As de Rebbe Zingt. So let's have a final listen to the 3 Yiddish divas, thank you very much for listening and hope to see you soon.
Wo bist du gewesen? Wo bist du gewesen? Sag mir doch der Getreie. Sag mir doch der Getreie.
Gewesen in Palästina, die goldene Medina. Hoi Mames ist gewesen am Mechaie. Gewesen in Palästina, die goldene Medina. Hoi Mames ist gewesen am Mechaie.
Was hast du getan? Was hast du getan? Sag mir doch der Getreie. Sag mir doch der Getreie.
Zerhackt hab ich Steine, es löschen noch die Beine. Mimis ist gewesen am Mechaie. Zerhackt hab ich Steine, es löschen noch die Beine. Mimis ist gewesen am Mechaie.
Was hast du gegessen? Was hast du gegessen? Sag mir doch der Getreie. Sag mir doch der Getreie.
Gegessen hab ich Kasche, verbrennt hat das Masche, aber Mames ist gewesen am Mechaie. Gegessen hat ich Kasche, verbrennt hat das Masche, Mames ist gewesen am Mechaie. It's not nearly as good as yours, I promise.
That's what you say now.
Wie bist du geschliffen? Wie bist du geschliffen?
Sag mir doch der Getreie. Sag mir doch der Getreie.
Affawagen, hey, mit Chalutz und zwei, oi, Mimis ist gewesen am Mechaie. Affawagen, hey, hey, mit Chalutz und zwei, oi, Mimis ist gewesen am Mechaie.
Was wird ein der Sof? Was wird ein der Sof? Sag mir doch der Getreie. Sag mir doch der Getreie.
Wird kommen ein neuer Tag.
Oi weh.
Fin Chalutz und Neu. Oi, Mame, wenn du sein am Mechaie. Wird kommen ein neuer Tag. Fin Chalutz und Neu. Oi, Mame, ist gewesen am Mechaie.
Jonno.
And there we have
Sandy.
it. Sandy, hi, how are you doing?
I'm getting better, honey. I want to thank you so